Over the past 4 months, tensions between the United States and Venezuela have sharpened dramatically as Washington intensifies both its military presence and economic pressure on the Maduro government. According to U.S. officials, American forces have carried out more than 20 strikes on vessels in the Caribbean region during this period, actions that reportedly resulted in nearly 90 deaths. The U.S. has described these operations as part of a campaign targeting drug traffickers and criminal networks that, it argues, funnel money to corrupt political actors and militant groups. Yet many international observers and regional analysts remain skeptical of this explanation. They point to the scale and sophistication of the American military buildup, deployments that include warships, a nuclear-powered submarine, and advanced F-35 fighter jets, as indicators that the mission may extend far beyond counter-narcotics. To them, the posture looks increasingly like preparation for a broader push toward regime change in Caracas. Despite the rising pressure, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has responded with defiance rather than retreat. In a forceful public address, he rallied supporters and emphasized that his government would not bow to outside coercion. "We are willing to fight to our last breath," he declared. "We will remain loyal to the oath we have made to Commander Chavez and to the people of Venezuela. It is not a time to vacillate. It is not a time to cower. It is a time for bravery. It is a time for combat. It is a time to build our Venezuelan homeland." His remarks were aimed not only at reassuring his political base, but also at sending a clear message to the United States that Venezuela would resist any attempt to undermine its sovereignty, whether through sanctions, seizures, or military intervention. Meanwhile, Washington has expanded its pressure campaign on another front, the overall oil trade. In a post released online, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that U.S. authorities had executed a seizure warrant for a crude oil tanker allegedly used to transport sanctioned petroleum from Venezuela and Iran. Bondi claimed the vessel was part of a covert shipping network that facilitated the flow of illicit oil to foreign buyers and, according to the U.S., helped fund groups designated as terrorist organizations. The operation reflects an increasingly aggressive effort by the Trump administration to disrupt Venezuela's oil revenues, which remain the country's primary source of income despite years of sanctions and economic collapse. Venezuelan officials, however, condemned the seizure in the strongest possible terms. Foreign Minister Iván Gil posted a statement on Instagram denouncing the U.S. action as a blatant theft and an act of international piracy, accusing Washington of using legal pretexts to justify what Caracas views as outright economic warfare. The Maduro government argues that these measures not only violate international law, but also worsen the humanitarian situation in Venezuela by constricting the country's ability to generate revenue needed for essential goods and services. The latest developments mark one of the most dramatic escalations in U.S. tactics since Trump first vowed to isolate Maduro's administration. By targeting both maritime routes and oil shipments, the United States appears determined to cut off the financial lifeline that keeps Venezuela's government afloat. At the same time, the presence of high-end military assets in the region has fueled widespread speculation about whether Washington is laying the groundwork for more direct action, including potentially airstrikes. While U.S. officials have not publicly confirmed such plans, the combination of forceful operations, economic seizures, and political messaging suggests that the confrontation is entering a more volatile and unpredictable phase. Lawyers representing a group of Palestine Action protesters have issued a stark warning that several activists participating in a prolonged hunger strike inside British prisons are now at serious risk of dying in custody. According to their legal team, 8 detainees are refusing food in what has become one of the most significant mass hunger strikes in the UK since the early 1980s. 5 of the protesters have already been transferred to hospital as their conditions deteriorate rapidly, and at least one has reportedly lost around 10 kilograms after more than 5 weeks without eating. The firm Imran Khan and Partners, which represents the group, has formally requested an urgent meeting with the Justice Secretary, David Lammy, to discuss the escalating crisis. In a letter addressed to him, the lawyers expressed genuine and significant concern about the activists' worsening health, stressing that their strong personal convictions, combined with rapidly declining physical condition, pose a real and immediate risk to their lives. They warned that if the situation continues without intervention, it is increasingly possible that young British citizens will die in prison having never been convicted of any offense. 4 of the hunger strikers are among those accused of involvement in an alleged raid on Elbit Systems Horizon, a UK subsidiary of the Israeli defense manufacturer, near Bristol in August 2024. During that incident, a prison officer was reportedly left with a fractured spine, according to evidence presented in court. The other protesters are accused of breaking into RAF Brize Norton, the country's largest Royal Air Force base, where they allegedly caused damage to 2 military aircraft. Palestine Action previously claimed that 2 activists infiltrated the base and sprayed red paint into the engines of 2 Airbus Voyager planes before escaping undetected. The detainees' lawyers say the protesters are not only suffering physically from the hunger strike, but are also facing what they describe as extreme restrictions on communication. According to legal submissions, the activists have been subjected to tight limits on visits, phone access, and mail. Their representatives argue that these measures may amount to enforced disappearance, citing concerns raised by UN special rapporteurs. Among the strikers is Amy or Amu Gardner-Gibson, who is believed to be more than a month into her strike at HMP Bronzefield in Surrey. Lawyers say she has lost more than 10 kilograms and is experiencing severe exhaustion, muscle twitching, and weakness so pronounced that she has been offered a wheelchair. Another striker, John Sink, is reported to have also lost around 10 kilograms and is suffering from deteriorating vision, sleeplessness, and what doctors describe as dangerously high ketone levels, signs of potentially life-threatening starvation. Other participants include Louis Chiaramolo, currently 15 days into the strike at HMP Bristol, and Umer Khalid on day 5 at HMP Wormwood Scrubs in London. Meanwhile, Kesser Zura, who has refused food for 37 days, is said to have lost considerable weight and struggles to walk, with a persistently elevated heart rate exceeding 100 beats per minute. Additional cases underscore the scale of the crisis. Heba Moraisi reportedly fell ill with a cold around the 34th day of her strike at HMP Newhall. Tauta Hoksha and Kamran Ahmed, striking at HMP Peterborough, were both hospitalized after suffering headaches, dizziness, and dangerously low blood pressure. Mr. Ahmed has collapsed multiple times in his cell and was most recently admitted to hospital again earlier this week. The hunger strike began as a protest against what the activists describe as mistreatment in prison, combined with political demands, such as the lifting of the ban on Palestine Action and the shutdown of defense companies alleged to have ties to Israel. Recently, courts granted permission for the group's founder, Huda Amori, to challenge the government's decision to proscribe Palestine Action under counterterrorism laws. A panel of 3 high court judges is expected to rule on the matter in the coming weeks. Lawyers say communication with their clients is becoming increasingly difficult, as many protesters are now showing signs of memory loss due to prolonged starvation. In a letter to NHS England signed by 147 doctors and medical experts, the situation was described as a medical emergency, posing an imminent risk to their health and life. Speaking publicly, Ms. Amori echoed these warnings, describing the activists' condition as an unfolding emergency, and noting that some detainees are now skeletal. She added that many could remain on remand for up to 2 years before trial and are facing harsh treatment due to being labeled terrorists. Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, reappeared in public for the first time in nearly a year after making a daring escape from her country, arriving quietly in Oslo just hours after an emotional moment involving her daughter and Norway's crown princess. Machado's sudden emergence came on Thursday when she stepped onto a balcony at a hotel in the Norwegian capital, waving to a crowd of supporters who had gathered in anticipation of the newly announced Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Her public appearance, after 11 months of being hidden from view, was met with cheers, applause, and chants that echoed through the square. Earlier that same day, Machado's daughter had accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in her mother's name, a moment that deeply moved Princess Mette-Marit of Norway, who was photographed wiping tears from her eyes as she sat alongside the royal family during the ceremony. The emotional scenes highlighted the international recognition Machado has received for her peaceful challenge to the authoritarian rule of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Her efforts have been described by the Norwegian Nobel Committee as one of the most remarkable examples of civic courage in modern Latin America. When Machado appeared on the balcony, dressed simply in jeans and a warm puffer jacket, supporters erupted into chants of "Libertad, Libertad," and later, "Presidente, Presidente." She embraced members of the crowd, greeted her family and aides, and delivered a brief but heartfelt message: "I want you all back in Venezuela." Many lifted their phones to capture the moment, knowing how historic and improbable her presence in Norway was. Machado told reporters that she intends to bring the Nobel Prize back to Venezuela, but declined to say when she would return, emphasizing the risks involved. In an audio message released on the Nobel website prior to her arrival, she had hinted at the danger surrounding her journey, saying that many people had risked their lives to help her travel to Oslo. Flight tracking data later showed that the plane she arrived on came from Bangor, Maine, though details of her escape route remain undisclosed. Her daughter, Ana Corina Sosa, who delivered the Nobel lecture written by Machado, spoke of her mother's unwavering commitment to a democratic Venezuela. She told the audience that Machado will never give up and expressed confidence that she would soon return home. Also present at the ceremony were several prominent Latin American leaders, including the presidents of Argentina, Ecuador, Panama, and Paraguay, signaling strong regional solidarity. Machado, 58, rose to prominence as the most significant opposition figure in Venezuela in recent years. She won her coalition's primary election and was expected to challenge Maduro in 2024 presidential race, but the government barred her from running, a move widely condemned by international observers. Instead, retired diplomat Edmundo González became the opposition candidate. The election period saw an escalation of repression, arrests, disqualifications, and widespread human rights violations, only intensifying after the Maduro-controlled Electoral Council declared him the winner. González later sought asylum in Spain and attended the ceremony in Oslo. In her Nobel lecture, Machado's daughter spoke about the sacrifices made by Venezuelans in their 2-decade struggle for democratic freedoms, emphasizing the resilience of ordinary citizens who continued to resist authoritarianism. She avoided referencing the ongoing tensions between Washington and Caracas, where President Donald Trump's military operations in the Caribbean have resulted in Venezuelan casualties and heightened regional fears. Machado has previously endorsed Trump's pressure strategy against Maduro. The ceremony also underscored a somber reality. Several past Nobel Peace Prize recipients were unable to attend their own award ceremonies because they were imprisoned, including recent laureates from Iran, Belarus, China, Myanmar, and Germany. Venezuelan activist Gustavo Tovar Arroyo, who fled in 2012, summed up the sentiment among Machado's supporters. While they were disappointed she couldn't attend the ceremony herself, they understood the risks inherent in challenging what he called a criminal regime. Oil prices retreated on Thursday as global energy markets shifted their attention back to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations, even as traders continued to weigh the potential implications of a recent U.S. action involving a sanctioned oil tanker off Venezuela's coast. After a brief period of gains driven by geopolitical uncertainty, crude benchmarks slipped as investors reassessed risk levels and looked for clearer signals about future supply stability. By mid-morning trading at 0904 GMT, Brent crude futures had fallen 81 cents, or around 1.3%, to trade at $61.40 per barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate, or WTI, saw a similar decline, dropping 78 cents, also 1.3%, to $57.68 per barrel. These price movements marked a reversal from the previous session, during which both benchmarks had settled higher after Washington announced the seizure of an oil tanker linked to sanctioned activities. That development had initially raised alarms about potential supply disruptions and the possibility of worsening U.S.-Venezuela tensions. However, market sentiment shifted once again as diplomatic signals from Moscow began to dominate the narrative. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Thursday that misunderstandings between Washington and Moscow had been resolved following a visit earlier this month by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. He also confirmed that Russia had officially delivered its proposals for collective security guarantees to the United States, an indication, traders believe, that both sides may be open to further negotiation rather than escalation. Despite these diplomatic overtures, analysts cautioned that the oil market remains fragile and highly sensitive to geopolitical shocks. Emerald Jamil, senior oil analyst at LSEG, noted that while the U.S. tanker seizure had not yet caused any measurable disruption to market flows, any escalation would impose heavy crude price volatility, particularly for heavy and sour crude grades sourced from politically unstable regions. He added that the market is in limbo, with traders closely monitoring the progress of Russia-Ukraine peace efforts, which continue to influence global risk appetite. U.S. President Donald Trump added to the uncertainty on Wednesday when he publicly stated, "We've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela. Large tanker, very large, largest one ever actually, and other things are happening." His comments raised additional questions about how aggressively Washington plans to enforce sanctions in the region. Although U.S. officials refrained from naming the vessel, Vanguard security firm later identified the ship as the Skipper, which it said was believed to have been taken near Venezuelan waters. The tanker seizure also comes at a time when Asian buyers, particularly in China and India, are demanding steep discounts for Venezuelan crude. This trend is being driven by an influx of sanctioned barrels from Russia and Iran, combined with heightened operational risks associated with loading oil in Venezuela as the U.S. increases its military presence in the Caribbean. Industry sources say these conditions have further strained Venezuela's already limited export capacity. Meanwhile, broader geopolitical tensions continue to influence supply expectations. On Wednesday, leaders from Britain, France, and Germany held a joint call with President Trump to discuss Washington's latest efforts to broker a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, describing the moment as critical for the future trajectory of the conflict. Shortly afterward, Ukrainian drones reportedly struck a Russian oil and gas platform in the Caspian Sea, an unprecedented attack that forced the facility to halt production, according to a source from Ukraine's security service. Adding to the complexity of market calculations, the International Energy Agency released its monthly report on Thursday, in which it upgraded its forecast for global oil demand growth in 2026. At the same time, the agency trimmed its expectations for supply growth, a combination that suggests next year's surplus may be slightly narrower than previously anticipated. For investors, these fundamentals, coupled with mounting geopolitical uncertainty, underscore the delicate balance currently shaping the global energy landscape.